The champion stepped forward, chest puffed out, and shoved the old man in the red jacket straight into the boxing ring ropes. The veteran stumbled backward, his weathered hands catching the rope to steady himself. The crowd of young fighters went silent. Then the champion laughed. He laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. Nobody told him who trained the man who trained him. Nobody warned him about the old man with the sad eyes and the white beard, who'd been quietly watching from the corner for the past hour. His name was Frank Morrison, 70 years old, white hair, white beard, always wearing that same faded red jacket over a plain t-shirt. His face carried the weight of decades, lines etched deep around eyes that had seen too much. He looked like someone who'd wandered in off the street, maybe looking for a warm place to sit. That's what everyone thought when he first appeared at Riverside Boxing Gym that Tuesday morning. The younger fighters barely glanced at him. The receptionist had asked if he was lost. Frank just shook his head slowly and made his way to a bench in the corner, sitting down with the careful movements of a man whose body remembered old injuries. The gym was loud that morning. Heavy bags swung on their chains, gloves cracked against leather, rope skipped rhythmic patterns on the floor. And in the center ring, Marcus, the Hammer Williams, was holding court. 26 years old, undefeated in 18 professional fights, with a knockout ratio that had promoters calling him the next big thing. Marcus moved like violence set to music, his combinations sharp and brutal. He'd been training at Riverside for 6 months, ever since his coach, Danny Chen, had opened the place. Danny was a respected trainer, a former contender himself who'd built a reputation for developing raw talent into champions, and Marcus was his masterpiece. Frank sat and watched. He didn't move much, didn't talk to anyone. His sad, serious expression never changed as he observed the fighters going through their routines. Occasionally his eyes would track a combination, follow a fighter's footwork, note the angle of a punch, but mostly he just sat there, this old man in a red jacket, looking like he had nowhere else to be. Marcus noticed him during a water break. He nudged his sparring partner and gestured toward Frank with his chin. "The old man's watching you," his partner said. Marcus turned and stared directly at Frank, then raised his gloved hands in a mocking gesture. "You want some of this, old-timer?" The other fighters chuckled. Frank's expression didn't change. He just looked back at Marcus with those sad, serious eyes and said nothing. Danny Chen was in his office when it started. He was reviewing fight footage, planning Marcus's next training cycle. The gym was his dream, built from years of saving and sacrifice. He'd transformed an old warehouse into a proper boxing facility, complete with 2 rings, a full weight room, and space for 20 heavy bags. The walls were covered with photos of fighters, some famous, most forgotten. In the corner of his office sat a single-framed photograph he never showed anyone, a picture of himself as a young man standing next to an older fighter, both in military fatigues, both wearing boxing gloves, somewhere in a desert that looked like it belonged to another world. Marcus finished his workout and started his cool-down routine. He was shadowboxing near the ring where Frank sat when he decided to have some fun. He moved closer to the old man, throwing combinations in the air just inches from Frank's face. The other fighters watched. Some looked uncomfortable. Others grinned, waiting to see what would happen. Frank didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, watching Marcus with that same unchanging expression. "You know what this is, old man?" Marcus asked, still throwing punches. "This is a boxing gym, not a retirement home." Frank's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "I know what it is." His words were soft, almost gentle, but there was something underneath them, something that made a few of the older fighters pause. Marcus didn't notice. He was too caught up in his own performance, too confident in his dominance of this space. "Maybe you should find somewhere else to sit," Marcus said. "Somewhere that doesn't smell like work." Frank stood up slowly. His movements were careful, measured. He was shorter than Marcus by several inches, his frame lean where the champion was built like a weapon. The red jacket hung loose on his shoulders. His white beard caught the light from the overhead fluorescence, and his eyes, those sad, serious eyes, looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity. "I'll move," Frank said quietly. "I didn't mean to be in your way." That's when Marcus made his mistake. As Frank turned to walk away, Marcus reached out and shoved him. Not hard enough to really hurt, but hard enough to send the old man stumbling backward into the ring ropes. Frank's hands caught the rope, his body bending with the impact. For a moment, the entire gym went silent. The heavy bags stopped swinging. The jump ropes hit the floor. Every eye turned toward the ring. One of the assistant trainers, a young guy named Tommy who'd been at the gym since it opened, went pale. He dropped the pads he was holding and ran toward Danny's office. His footsteps echoed across the sudden quiet of the gym. Marcus stood in the center of the ring, still grinning, still playing to the crowd. He didn't see Tommy burst into the office. He didn't hear the sharp intake of breath or the sound of a chair scraping back fast. He was too busy basking in the attention, in the nervous laughter of fighters who didn't know whether to join in or look away. Danny Chen came out of his office like a man who'd seen a ghost. His face had drained of all color. His hands were shaking. He walked across the gym floor with quick, purposeful steps, his eyes locked on the old man in the red jacket who was slowly straightening up, one hand still on the rope. Danny's voice cracked when he spoke. "Frank?" Just that one word, barely more than a whisper, but it carried across the silent gym like a gunshot. Frank turned. His sad expression softened just slightly when he saw Danny. The younger man was crossing the distance between them now, moving faster. "Hello, Danny," Frank said quietly. "It's been a long time." Danny stopped a few feet away, and suddenly he was standing at attention, his spine straight, his arms at his sides. The transformation was instant and absolute. Every fighter in the gym saw it. Their coach, their mentor, the man who commanded respect from everyone who walked through these doors, was standing at attention like a recruit in front of a drill sergeant. Marcus's grin faded. He looked from Danny to Frank and back again, confusion replacing his earlier arrogance. "Coach, what's going on?" Danny didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on Frank, and there was something in his expression that none of his fighters had ever seen before. Something like reverence mixed with old grief. "Sir," Danny said, his voice tight with emotion, "I didn't know you were here. If I had known, I would have been out here immediately. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about what just happened." Frank shook his head slowly. "You have nothing to apologize for, Danny. I should have called ahead. I just wanted to see what you'd built here." His eyes moved around the gym, taking in the equipment, the fighters, the photographs on the walls. "You've done well." "Very well." Danny's jaw clenched. He turned then, finally, to look at Marcus. The champion had stepped back, suddenly uncertain, reading the room and not liking what he was seeing. "Do you know who this man is?" Danny asked, his voice hard now, controlled fury beneath each word. Marcus shook his head. "He's just some old guy who was watching. I was just messing around, coach. I didn't mean anything by it." Danny's hands curled into fists at his sides. "This man," Danny said, his voice rising now so every fighter in the gym could hear him clearly, "is Colonel Frank Morrison, United States Marine Corps, retired. He served 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 in Desert Storm, 1 in Iraq. He has more medals than I can count, including 2 Silver Stars and a Bronze Star with Valor. And before all of that, before he became one of the most decorated officers in Marine Corps history, he was the best boxer the Corps ever produced." The gym was so quiet, you could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Marcus stood frozen in the ring, his face going from tan to grey. Danny wasn't finished. Colonel Morrison didn't just box. He coached. He trained fighters all over the world. He trained me. Everything I know, everything I've taught every single one of you, I learned from this man. He took a scared kid from Los Angeles who thought he was tough and turned him into someone who actually understood what strength meant. He saved my life more than once, in the ring and out of it. Frank raised a hand, a small gesture. "Danny, that's enough. You don't need to do this." But Danny shook his head. "Yes, sir, I do. Because someone in this gym just put his hands on you. Someone I trained put his hands on you. And that means I failed. That means I didn't teach him the most important lesson you taught me. Respect. Real respect. Not the kind you demand, but the kind you earn through how you treat people, especially people you think can't hurt you." Marcus found his voice, though it came out smaller than before. "Coach, I swear I didn't know. I thought he was just some homeless guy or something. I was just playing around." Danny's expression was ice. "That's the problem, Marcus. You saw an old man in a worn jacket and you decided he didn't matter. You decided he didn't deserve your respect because he didn't look like someone important. You judged him by his appearance and his age, and then you put your hands on him. Frank stepped forward then, moving between Danny and Marcus. His movements were still careful, still measured, but there was something different in his bearing now, something that made it clear why men had followed him into combat, why Danny Chen stood at attention in his presence. "Son," Frank said, looking up at Marcus, "let me tell you something. I've been disrespected before, more times than I can count. When I came back from Vietnam, people spit on my uniform. When I got older, people stopped seeing the man and only saw the age. I understand how the world works, but here's what you need to understand. Respect isn't about who's stronger or younger or more successful. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone you meet. It's about treating people with dignity, regardless of what they can do for you." Marcus's eyes were wet now. He climbed out of the ring and stood in front of Frank. "Sir, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was completely wrong." Frank studied him for a long moment with those sad, serious eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, but you need to learn from this. You need to understand that strength without character is just violence, and violence without purpose is just cruelty." Danny stepped closer. "Sir, would you consider staying? Would you consider watching some of our training? Maybe offering some guidance?" The gym went still again, every fighter holding their breath. Frank looked around at all the young faces watching him. He saw their curiosity, their shame, their hope. Finally, he nodded. "I can stay for a while, but only if someone can find me a decent cup of coffee." The tension broke. Fighters scrambled to make coffee, to clear space, to prepare. Danny walked Frank to a better seat, one with a cushion, positioned where he could see both rings clearly. As they walked, Danny spoke quietly. "I have your picture in my office, sir. The one from Camp Lejeche. I look at it every day. It reminds me where I came from." Frank's hand rested briefly on Danny's shoulder. "You've honored everything I tried to teach you, Danny. This gym, these fighters, the way you've built something meaningful. I'm proud of you." For the next 3 hours, Frank Morrison sat and watched. Sometimes he would call out a suggestion, his quiet voice somehow carrying across the noise of the gym. "Tuck that elbow. Watch your feet. Don't telegraph the right hand." The fighters listened like their lives depended on it. And Marcus, the undefeated champion, worked harder than he'd ever worked before, trying to prove something to the old man in the red jacket, trying to show that he could learn, that he could be better. When Frank finally stood to leave, every fighter in the gym stopped what they were doing. Danny walked him to the door. At the threshold, Frank turned back one last time. His sad, serious expression hadn't changed, but there was something softer in his eyes now. "You're doing good work here, Danny. Keep teaching them, not just how to fight, but how to be men worth respecting." Danny stood at attention one more time. "Yes, sir. I will, sir." Frank Morrison walked out into the afternoon sunlight, his red jacket bright against the grey of the city street. Behind him, in the gym, Marcus Williams stood in the center of the ring, his hands on the ropes where he'd shoved an old man just hours before. He stood there for a long time, thinking about respect and judgment, and the lessons that come from seeing people as they truly are, rather than as they appear to be. And in the corner of Danny's office, that photograph from Camp Lejeche remained on the desk, a reminder that the greatest champions are often the ones who never needed to prove it.